Session 4, we're going to talk about Rule 7 and 8. Rule 7 is pretty straightforward, pretty simple. We'll go through it fairly quickly. Rule 8's got a lot of meat in it. Both the rules just have a couple of minor little changes and new additions to the new rules. But Rule 8 is the one that we're going to spend a lot of time with today. Rule 7 talks about finding and identifying the ball. It actually had its own rule before, and it's got its own rule moving forward as well. Then we're going to talk about Rule 8, the course is played as it's found. A couple of quick little things. Did anybody see the USGA's release on the clarification of the rules this morning? They're all clear now. So, now the USGA did release a statement today, about an hour ago, with some clarifications on some of the new rules. So go to their website and look at it. I've got it printed out. I printed it out last night and a couple things. And the only reason I'm mentioning it is because there was a question about embedded ball. Like if an embedded ball was in above a bunker and we couldn't find a spot to where we could get free relief from that. And they addressed it in one of these things, and the answer is, well, you might not get free relief. There's going to be situations where your ball is embedded in the general area, but you're not entitled to relief. And because if you can't find a spot within that club length of the reference point, or even create a reference point, unfortunately, you can't take free relief. So that's a question that somebody brought up a couple weeks ago. It's in Rule 16. We haven't discussed it yet with our seminars or anything, but there's your answer. So like for example, let's say your ball flies over a penalty area and plugs just on the other side of the yellow line in the general area. You don't have a reference point because the reference point is right behind that pitch mark, and it would be in the penalty area. You don't get free relief in that situation. So don't get mad at me. That's what the USGA said. But there are situations where embedded ball, you're not going to get free relief. So that answers a couple of those questions that we talked about earlier. But please go to the website. There's a 4-page document. I've got it printed out. If you want to kind of glance at it afterwards, that's fine. Just clarifying some of the things that are about the new rules. So it's pretty good. So, all right, so let's talk about Rule 7. Broken down into these 4 bullet points here. We're going to talk about these underlying terms as well that are very important, not just in this rule, but in the rules of golf in general. What fairly search means, what we do if we have an accidental movement of a ball while we're doing that. Again, deliberate and accidental are 2 terms that we really need to be aware of and pay attention to. Major changes within Rule 7 is there's no penalty for improving conditions during a search as long as it happens while fairly searching. So as long as you're looking for your ball fairly and you improve your conditions affecting the stroke, you're not going to be penalized. That's a change. Announcing or involving others is not required when lifting for ID. We've talked about that before. The rules of golf now trust you to go ahead and do what you're supposed to do. We don't need somebody over your shoulder every time you are checking out your ball. And there's no penalty if the ball is moved while searching for or trying to identify it. When we get into this one, we will be very specifically talking about you must be searching for the ball. Just accidentally moving your ball in the general area is still going to be a penalty. You have to be actively searching for your ball for this to apply. Okay, here's our purpose statement talking about Rule 7. It allows this player to take reasonable actions to fairly search for his or her ball in play. And again, what does fairly search mean? We will talk about that in depth as we get into that, but if you're doing reasonable actions looking for your golf ball, you're going to be fine if you accidentally move it. Okay, we'll talk about what is reasonable and what's not reasonable here in a little bit. Because the player still must be careful because he's still on the hook for moving his ball. Okay, if you're fairly doing it, fine. If you're not fairly doing it, you're still going to be penalized. Player will get no penalty if this ball is accidentally moved. You're going to see this over and over again. They're really clear on this. Accidental, no penalty. Okay, and we'll talk about the difference between accidental in golf and accidental in English. What is the big difference there? All right, so 7.1. Okay, the player may fairly search for the ball by taking reasonable actions to find and identify it, such as moving sand and water. So you can move sand and water in a penalty area or in the general area when you're looking for your golf ball. You can move and bend grass, bushes, tree branches, and other growing or attached natural objects. They can also be broken, as long as it's an accident. We don't want you going in there just hacking everything down and just looking for your ball that way. But if you're just kind of peeling off something and looking at some tall grass, for my ball probably, you break something, you're fine. Okay? But if you were going in there pulling up weeds and trying to find your ball, that is not an accident. And you would be penalized in that situation. Okay. There's no penalty under 8.1a if the improvement results from a fair search. Okay? Make sure that we understand what a fair search is. And I just kind of explained some good examples right there. If the improvement results from actions that exceeded what was reasonable for a fair search, you're going to get the general penalty under this rule. Okay, so pulling those weeds up and improving the conditions that affect the stroke will get you a 2-stroke penalty in stroke play and loss of hole in match play. In trying to find and identify the ball, the player may remove loose impediments as allowed in Rule 15.1 and movable obstructions in 15.2. Okay, does that say you can't do it in a bunker? No. Does it say you can't do it in a penalty area? So this is anywhere. You can move loose impediments when you're looking for your ball, no problem. You can move loose impediments at any time anyway. So there's no restrictions here to moving those loose impediments. However, if your ball moves, you're going to be penalized. So be very careful in moving those loose impediments. Okay, here's some examples of unlikely fair search. Taking an action to flatten areas of grass beyond what is reasonably necessary to walk through. So if you're just kind of hopping around or stepping down on stuff, that's not reasonable. Okay? Purposely removing any growing thing from the ground. That's like I said, pulling up the weeds or something when you're doing something like that. That's going to be a violation and an unlikely a fair search. Breaking a tree branch to allow easier access when there was another way to get in. You know, if you're too lazy to walk around and you break a tree branch, the rules of golf are going to penalize you. So, you know, if there's a way to get there, with least intrusive is a term that we've heard over the years with the rules of golf. But that's exactly what we're talking about here. As long as you make an effort to get in there fairly, you're going to be fine. Okay, so now if the ball's in the sand, what do we do? Okay, here's where we start talking about recreating the lie. If you're looking for your ball in sand, which you're allowed to move with your hand, your club, or otherwise, and your ball moves, you're going to replace that ball and recreate the lie. Okay, this is not a change. It's just in a different part of the rules book now. But the player must recreate that original lie in the sand, but may leave a small part of the ball visible had it been completely covered by sand. Not a change. It's something we've had in the past. If the player plays the ball without having recreated the original lie, the player gets the penalty. So if you just put that ball back and don't cover it back up, and you make a stroke there, then you're going to get a 2-stroke penalty in stroke play and loss of hole in match play. Okay. All right, so how do we identify a golf ball? Make sure that it's ours before we make a stroke at it. Okay. So if a player's ball at rest may be identified by a number of ways here now, and it really talks about in the rules some specific different ways that we haven't really talked about before, but it's not a change. The rules just point out what we really can do and give us a little bit more examples of what we can do in the rules. So it can be identified by the player or anyone else seeing a ball come to rest in circumstances where it's known to be the player's ball. So if you hit a drive right down the middle of the fairway and it comes to rest 250 yards right in the middle and everybody sees it, okay, we know it's your ball. You don't have to go through a process in identifying it. We know your ball is there. That's really what it's taken about. Seeing the identifying mark on the ball, okay, we talked about last week 6.3a, a player should identify their ball with a mark, not necessary. But if you see your mark on there, you've identified your golf ball. But also here's an interesting point that we need to pay attention to here. By finding a ball with the same brand, model, number, and condition as the player's ball in an area where the player's ball is expected to be. So you hit a Titleist 1 in some rough and you walk over, Titleist 1, I've identified it, fine. That's okay by the rules. However, if there's another Titleist 1 over there, you better be able to separate them somehow. Okay, like if your ball hit a cart path earlier in the round and you know you've got the mark on it or something, that's fine. That's identifying your golf ball. But if they're the same golf ball, you better be able to make a difference there. Or otherwise, you're going to have a situation where you're probably going to end up playing a wrong ball. The player's provisional ball cannot be distinguished from his or her original ball. We'll talk about that in Rule 18.3. So if you hit 2 golf balls in the same area, and you've got to mark the same way, which I used to do in college. I would always mark my ball one way with a big purple dot on it, and then I actually had this happen to me once where I hit them in the same area. Pretty good lesson learned right there, because I ended up going back to the tee hitting 5. But that's not what the decision was at the time, so I kind of got a bad ruling, but that does happen. But the new rules will cover this, what's going to happen. And we'll talk about it in 18, just to give you guys the answer. What would happen is you're going to pick one of them to be your provisional and play that one as your provisional, laying 3. So. All right, the ball might be a player's ball, but it cannot be identified, so we've got this process that's a lot less strict and severe than it used to be. It's not as formal. We're not asking somebody to come over and watch you do it anymore. So the player may lift the ball to identify it, including rotating it, okay? But there's a certain couple of things that have to happen. Okay? The spot of the ball first must be marked, and the ball must not be cleaned more than necessary to see an identifying mark. This is one of the 4 times that you cannot clean your golf ball in the rules of golf. Okay, you can just rub a little bit off of a piece of dirt or grass that might be covering the number or covering your mark, That's fine, but you cannot clean the entire ball. You'd be on the hook for a penalty there. Okay? The exception, of course, is on the putting green. Okay? If you're trying to identify your ball on the putting green, you can do whatever you want on the putting green. Another good example of authority overriding prohibition. You're not allowed to clean your ball when identifying it, but if it's on the putting green, you can. If the lifted ball is the player's ball or another player's ball, it must be replaced on its original spot underneath 14.2. Okay, so if it is your ball, it must be replaced. May we substitute? No, we cannot. Okay, that's a good example right there of not being able to substitute a golf ball in play. If the player lifts his or her ball into this rule when it's not reasonably necessary to identify it, except on the putting green, which is the holy land of golf, everything can happen there, fails to mark the spot of the ball before lifting it or cleans it when not allowed, you get one penalty stroke. So this is that procedural penalty where if you multiply or make multiple breaches here, you're only going to get the one stroke. So if you don't mark it and you clean it when you're not supposed to, you're only going to get one stroke, unless it's on the putting green. And what is reasonably believing that we have to identify it? If you got somebody in your group that every hole is checking his ball, you might want to question what he's doing. Because generally we know what's going on. If you hit a ball down the middle of the fairway, we don't need to lift it and put it back and identify it. So reasonable is one of those terms that we need to understand what it means. And when you see it, you'll know what's unreasonable. All right, so penalty for playing an incorrectly substituted ball or playing from a wrong place in the breach of this rule is the general penalty. So if you substitute a ball, you're going to get the general penalty. If you play from a wrong place, you're going to get a general penalty. So like if you identify your golf ball and set it down or replace it in the wrong spot and play from there, it's a two-stroke penalty. If you do both of them, you're only going to get a two-stroke penalty. They don't combine on top of each other. Okay? That's where our good old 1.3c4, I told you we'd be referring to that rule very frequently throughout the rule book. All right, any questions so far on the golf ball, identifying it, finding it? Okay, it's pretty straightforward. Most of our questions will be in Rule 8, I promise. All right, so let's just talk about if we accidentally move our ball while we're trying to find it. Please note the rule. It says in trying to find or identify it. So we have to be trying to find it or identifying it for this rule to apply. There's no penalty if the player's ball is accidentally moved by the player or opponent or anyone else while trying to identify it. Again, walking down the middle of the fairway and you kick your ball, when you're not looking for it, you're going to get penalized and you're going to replace it. You have to be the act of moving it. A good example of that is if you hit a ball off the tee that goes through some trees right away off the tee, which is very frequent for me, and you think it gets all the way through and goes to like 250 yards down the middle with the draw that was going to happen eventually. And you start walking off the tee, and 30 yards off the tee, you kick a ball, and you look down, and it's yours. Okay? You weren't looking for it. You're going to be penalized, and it's going to be replaced. Okay? Because you weren't to the area where you thought your ball was. Okay? And this is another one of those examples where we would ask the player, were you looking for your ball? And we're going to trust his answer. And if you don't trust his answer, there's nothing wrong with asking a follow-up question. That's fine, trying to figure out what's going on. But we're going to trust the player's judgment in this as well. Yes? Mm-hmm.
And you accidentally kick it.
Mm-hmm.
It moves to a worse lie.
Mm-hmm.
Are you allowed to go back to the lie you had?
Okay. So if you're looking for your ball and you accidentally kick it and it goes into a different lie. A worse lie. Okay?
Because there's explanation previously about making a better lie.
Right. Well, the point about that is it's not going to matter. Because if you've kicked your ball in play, it has to be replaced. So you don't have the option of playing it as it lies or recreating your lie unless you've damaged your lie, which is going to be covered in a different rule. So like if you're looking in sand and you accidentally kick your ball, we're going to recreate that lie underneath a different rule. But you can't accept where your ball goes to, if that's what you're asking. You have to replace the ball where it was. All right, so if this does happen, the, highlighted in yellow there, the ball must be replaced on its original spot, which if not known must be estimated. So it's very common that you could be looking for a golf ball in the woods or in the weeds, and you kick it and you weren't exactly sure where it was. If you weren't exactly sure where it was today, what do we do with it when we replace it? We drop it. Moving forward, when we replace a golf ball, it's always placed. Even if we're estimating a spot, we're going to replace that ball down in the ground in the estimated spot that we thought it was, which also includes up or down. Okay, vertical placement of a golf ball when we're replacing it. That does matter. So if you kick a ball and you felt it like up here on your shin or something like that, you knew it was sitting up high. You've got some evidence and things like that. Pretty rare situation But it is important to note that vertical placement does matter when we're replacing a golf ball. So, yes?
In that case you just mentioned, that the ball won't stay above the ground.
Right.
It's tall grass, and you just,
So if the ball won't stay in the lie that we are estimating where it was, we're going to try to get it back into that similar lie as the nearest point within a club length.
right.
Yeah, so we'll get it back into that similar lie.
The question though is, if it's above the ground, tall grass,
Mhm.
and you know it's
Right.
above the ground, that it won't stay when you go to,
Yeah, again, if it won't stay in that tall grass, we got to find a spot, maybe find some tall grass around it within a club length. If we can't get it in that exact spot, we've got to try to get it back to that exact spot as best we can. And if we can't get it in the exact spot, we're going to get it close. We're going to use the best judgment to put it in that position. So, pretty rare situation, but that's how we would handle it. You know, I love these seminars when Gary's around. I really do. So. All right, so if the ball was on or under any immovable obstruction, integral object, boundary object, or growing attached natural object, the ball must be replaced on its original spot against those things. Okay? So, if you are looking for your ball near an out-of-bounds line, and you kick it right up against, and it was right up against the stake, you have to replace it up against the stake, is what it's saying, and then deal with it from there. Okay? Loose impediments are a different situation, and we'll talk about that more specifically when we get into the rule of loose impediments, I believe Rule 15. But if your ball, if you move a loose impediment while you're searching for your ball, you do not have to replace the loose impediment. There are some situations where you do have to replace a loose impediment, but those are specific to other rules. We're not going to talk about those today, but just as a heads up on that. So, but if you'll notice this in the statement, it doesn't mention loose impediments. This statement is talking about immovable obstructions, boundary objects, and so on and so forth. So basically fixed objects. It even talks about natural objects that are fixed, not loose. So it covers those situations there. So if the ball was covered by sand, the original lie must be recreated, and the ball must be replaced in that lie. But you may leave the small part of the ball visible when doing so. So it covers what we do when we accidentally move it, how we get it back into play. Okay. Here's the rule that I was talking about, restriction on deliberately removing certain loose impediments before replacing a ball. Okay. Just real quick, I'll tell you what this means. So if you have your ball that is on a leaf, and you're looking for it, and you accidentally kick it, and that leaf stays in place, but your ball moves, you have to replace the ball on the leaf. Okay? If you accidentally kick the leaf, you're going to be okay. Okay? Deliberately moving certain loose impediments. See the difference there? So Rule 15 will cover this when you're replacing a ball. If your ball is being replaced onto a leaf, you cannot remove that leaf. You have to leave it there. Because the removal of the leaf, if your ball was there, would cause the ball to move. That's the purpose of the rule. If you kick the leaf, do you have to replace it? Only if you did it deliberately. If you deliberately kick the leaf, accidental, no. This only covers the deliberate movement. So there is a big difference there. You know, it sounds confusing, but it goes back to the same principle that we've talked about, deliberate versus accidental. So, penalty for breaching this rule is the general penalty, so loss of whole match play, 2 strokes and stroke play. Any questions before I get into our question here? All right. In a stroke play event, Bailey is searching for her ball in a yellow penalty area. While probing for her ball in deep water, she kicks her ball that was laying on the bank. What is the ruling? Does everybody remember this decision from previous rules? We talked about this one. Okay. So do we have a penalty in this situation, or do we have a penalty? No penalty? Why no penalty? She's searching for her ball. And when she's searching for a ball and she accidentally kicks it, that's what this rule covers. Okay? No penalty. She may replace the ball or proceed directly underneath the penalty relief option since she's in a yellow penalty area. She may do that. But Rule 7.4 states there's no penalty for accidentally moving a ball during search. Okay, this is a reasonable action. So if you're walking along and you accidentally kick your ball while probing in water, this is reasonable. This is a change from the decision of 12-1/5. This used to be a penalty, but it is no longer a penalty. All right, there's Rule 7. Told you to be quick. Mark.
So when they use the term replace, that means no substitute.
Yes, yes. When you replace a ball, there is no substitution, with a couple of exceptions, and we can talk about those separately. You can only clean it when you're identifying it a little bit, but if you were to kick your ball and you have to replace it, you may clean it. There are only 4 times you cannot clean it, and this is not one of those 4 times. So is everybody clear with that one? Okay? If you are searching for your ball and you accidentally kick it and you have to replace it, you're allowed to clean the ball. There is nothing in the rules that say you cannot clean the ball in that situation. What are the situations you cannot clean your ball? Trying to identify it, like we're talking about here, you can clean a little bit. See if it's cut or cracked. Player interference, helping or not assisting anymore, it's either helping or interfering with, or determining if it's in a situation that you get relief, like if it's embedded or if it's in ground under repair. That's it. Any other time you have your ball in your hand, you can clean it. Okay? Everybody good on that?
What was the fourth one?
Like if you're trying to determine if the ball is in a situation in which you are granted relief. For example, you're checking to see if it's embedded. You mark it and you lift it and see if it's embedded. You cannot clean it. However, if you did clean it and it turns out to be embedded, you wouldn't be penalized. Yes. Yeah. So, all right. The cleaning golf ball rule is kind of confusing, but I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. There's really only 4 times you can't do it. They are checking to see if it's in a situation in which you are getting relief, such as an embedded ball, or if it's possibly in an abnormal course condition or in ground under repair. So you're checking to see if you do get relief. If it's interfering with or helping play, remember, you've got to kind of put it off to the side. You're checking to see if it's cut or cracked, or you're identifying your golf ball, in which you're allowed to clean just a little bit of it. Those are the 4 times you cannot clean a golf ball. And then, of course, if your ball is on the putting green in any of those situations, that overrides the cleaning rule. You get to clean it anytime it's on the putting green. All right? The rules are so kind, aren't they? Let us do all kinds of things. All right, so let's talk about Rule 8. Broken up into these 3 situations. It's talking about the golf course plate as it's found. Okay, this, again, talking about the divots. You play your ball as it lies, unless another rule applies. And there's no rule that allows you to take a ball out of a divot and get yourself a better lie. Okay. So the player's actions that improve the conditions affecting the stroke is the main meat of this rule. And the biggest term that you're going to talk about for now moving forward with the rules of golf is conditions affecting the stroke. So we will go over really clearly what that means. And then we'll talk about some deliberate actions to alter the physical conditions of your ball or another player's ball. Okay, here's the purpose of this rule. Again, play the course as you find it. When the player's ball comes to rest, he or she normally has to accept the conditions affecting the stroke and not improve them before playing the ball. You know, you hit it once, find it, hit it again. All we're doing here. We're not doing anything else. A player may take certain reasonable actions to improve these conditions, and there are limited circumstances where conditions may be restored. So if you're searching for your ball and you improve these conditions, you're going to be okay as long as it's a fair search, like we just talked about in Rule 7. So there are situations that you can improve the conditions affecting the stroke and you're not going to be penalized, but there are some certain stipulations involved with those. Again, one of the great features of golf is that it tests the player's ability to execute a great assortment of strokes under a perplexing variety of conditions. Very full mouth of words there, but it really talks about what golf is about. Okay, you know, I had a quote earlier a couple weeks ago from Bobby Jones. It says, golf is like life. You deal with what you get. You hit a good shot, and sometimes get a bad break. You get a bad shot, you get a good break. We just deal with it. Okay, notable changes within this rule. The definition of conditions affecting the stroke allows the list of these protected areas in that 2016 rules to be referred to in the new rules. So there was some decisions that talked about what is a stroke, what is a lie, what are we talking about in trying to improve something where we would be penalized. The conditions affecting the stroke takes all this together and defines it and gives us what we're talking about. So that's all this is really talking about right now. Building a stance is now a breach of improving. It's no longer a standalone rule. Still the same policy, still everything is the same from 2016, no big change there. It's just underneath a different situation in the rules book. If a player improves the condition affecting the stroke, in some cases the actions can be undone. So if you do something that will create a penalty, there are situations that you can save yourself. It's kind of the eraser rule of improving your areas affecting the stroke, or your conditions affecting the stroke. And in some cases, when a condition affecting a player's stroke is worsened, the player can restore the worsened condition. That's really not a change. It's kind of an equity principle that we had before, but it's just now included directly in the rules. This is what the rule used to look like. They talked about the 3-part structure, and they just kind of revamped it a little bit. It's still very similar. Okay, so when we were talking about Rule 13, it told us these different areas that must not be improved, prohibited means of improvement, and exceptions. We've just kind of redone it, and then we've added a couple things on top of it. Now we have the ability to restore improved conditions to avoid a penalty, okay? And the ability to restore those worsened conditions, like I just mentioned, is the equity principle. So here's a good example of a rule that took a lot of decisions from the old rules and incorporated it into the new rule. Okay, 8.1, divided up into 4 bullet points underneath it. Things that we can't do, things that we can do, how to fix the things that we did, and then we can move from there without penalty sometimes. And we'll go over those examples of when we can fix something and when we can't. Okay, so definitions, improve. This comes directly from the decisions, and they put it right into the rules. To alter one or more of the conditions affecting the stroke or other physical conditions affecting play. Okay, so anything that you are getting out of your way so that you can make a stroke is going to be falling underneath this definition of improve. You're not allowed to do that in certain situations. So that the player gains a potential advantage for the stroke. Okay? Potential advantage for the stroke. Not necessarily an advantage, but potentially. So it's possible that you could be penalized even without getting the advantage benefited to you. So if you're doing things on the golf course that could possibly give you an advantage, you're probably going to get penalized. Let's see if I can get my video going here. This is a very quick little video. Tell me what you think here. Is that okay? See, we got some yeses and some nos. This is not okay. Okay? Why is this not okay? She improved the areas affecting the stroke by pushing it out of the way when there is clearly another way for her to get in there. What would be the way to fix this? Back into it or slide into it? There's a way to get into it, but when she's pushing it out of the way and then bracing it underneath herself, she's improved her area or improved the conditions affecting her stroke. Okay? She can fix this, and we'll talk about that later. But if she makes that stroke, she's going to be penalized. Yep. She'd be okay. She'd be okay if she walked back out and got back in. You kind of ruined my later thing. But it was coming. Everybody knew about it. Okay, the lie of the player's ball at rest, the area of the intended stance, the area of the intended swing, the line of play, and the relief area where the player will drop or place the ball. These are all conditions affecting the stroke. So this is what we really need to be aware of when we're talking about this specific rule. Okay? This definition has many definitions within it. And this is kind of one of the, like I said, this is the meaty part of this rule right here, so we really have to understand this one. A lie refers to now the spot on which the ball is at rest and any growing or natural object, movable obstruction, integral or boundary object touching the ball or right next to it. The lie of the ball is a very inclusive area now. It's not just where your ball is. Okay? Loose impediments and movable obstructions are not part of the lie of the ball. We can get those out of the way. So they are not considered a part of the lie of the ball. Area of the intended stance includes both where the player will place his feet and the entire area that might reasonably affect how and where the player's body is positioned. Okay, so if you have an odd stance or something like that, that is still going to be your area of intended stance. If it's not just right here, you might have to get over here and hit it like this, or you might be on top of the ball. Whatever the situation is, it's not a specific area. It's this whole general area that's covered by these definitions. It's all in that area when you're preparing for and making that intended stroke. It also includes the entire area that might reasonably affect any part of the backswing, the downswing, or the completion of the swing. So the whole entire action of the stroke is going to be covered in the area of intended swing. Okay? There's another video here. See what you guys think about this. All right. What do we think about his getting into that bush area? Was it okay? We always get yeses and nos in this one too. This is fine. He is stepping into it and getting himself into position least intrusively. Okay, he's actually stepping over some branches and trying to get himself in there. Believe me, I'm not a Keegan Bradley fan. I wouldn't mind penalizing him. But this is fine. Okay, he's getting in there. He's not sliding in there or backing into it and pushing the bushes down or anything like that. He's merely stepping into position and getting himself there. It depends on how you back into something. So if he backs into it, is he okay? It really depends on how he does it. I mean, it's a gray area on purpose. We have to watch and see what happens. Okay. All right, the line of play is the line where the player intends his or her ball to go after a stroke, including the area on that line that is a reasonable distance up above the ground and on either side of the line. So it's not a specific tiny little line. It is a little bit of a width there. And the line of play is not necessarily a straight line between 2 points. For example, you're playing a draw or a fade. Your line of play can curve. Okay. And the relief area, we've talked a little bit about it, but what it is the area where a player must drop a ball when taking relief under a rule. And so specifically, all the different rules have different relief areas and things like that. But it is an area that we cannot improve before dropping a ball. Okay, there are some things we can move, some things we can do, but there are some things we can't do. We can't improve that area in general. But we'll talk about that specifically. Okay, so the new structure, areas that must not be improved. Support this principle of the play of the course as you find that this rule restricts what a player may do to improve any of these protected conditions affecting the stroke. Okay, and the next stroke the player will make and the lie of the player's ball at rest. The area of that player's intended stance. We can't improve that either. Okay, the area of the player's swing. It's a good example of some grass right along on the shaft there. So we can't clear out all that grass because we know that our shaft is going to go through there. Can't improve that. The player's line of play. Okay, we're talking about raking footprints in a bunker. You can't improve those most of the time. Okay. The relief area where a player will drop or place the ball. So if you have a relief area here, can we put divots back? No, we can't. We cannot do that. Okay. Let's talk about a situation in which you would be allowed to put a divot back in the relief area. Say if I'm in the middle of the fairway and I take a full swing with my iron, take a big old divot, and the ball goes up to the right side, kind of fading off the edge of the green. I'm like, crap, and I replace my divot, and I go up there and I find out it's out of bounds. Okay? I have to come back and play from this spot, right? That's my only option in that situation because the local rule is not in effect because I don't play by that local rule yet. So if I go back and I have to play it from that same spot, that relief area that I've already improved, I'm okay in that situation because I didn't know my ball was out of bounds. But if I was going to hit a provisional or I knew my ball was out of bounds, I couldn't replace my divot in that relief area because that would violate this rule. Okay? Everybody understand that difference there? Knowledge of coming back to it keeps you from improving it. Okay? Prohibited means of improvement. We'll talk about some things that we can't do now specifically. This is not a change from the rules before. Moving, bending, or breaking any growing or attached natural object. Moving, bending, or breaking an immovable obstruction, an integral object, or a boundary object. Okay, so we can't break these things or move them out of the way. Tee marker when your ball is in the teeing area. Okay, that is a fixed object now. You can't take care of that one. You cannot alter the surface of the ground by replacing divots. It's an example of improving the area. Removing or pressing down replace divots. So you can't take a divot out of there, or you can't press it down and smooth it. Creating or eliminating holes, indentations, or evening surfaces. Pretty straightforward there. We're not going to allow you to mess with the ground. Okay? Here's an example of maybe a violation or maybe not. We'll see what you guys think. That kind of gives it away, doesn't it? Okay. Now, if this was a 150-yard shot, would she be penalized? No. It's unlikely that pushing down a divot a couple of feet in front of your ball from a 150-yard shot is going to improve the area of your line of play. But however, we've got a short little chip shot here. This clearly improves her area or her line of play. Okay. We cannot remove or press down sand or loose soil that is in the general area. There's an example right there of Rory moving some sand that's on the fringe there. He got penalized there. Okay. You can move that on the green or in the teeing area, but you can't do it in the general area. Removing dew, frost, or water. We can't do that. I love this video. I have to put it in every time. How about that? This game is easy. There's some multiple violations there that will result in a two-stroke penalty or loss of hole. That's right. So I'm glad everybody's laughing and sees that that is a violation. Okay. Some prohibited means of improvement, building a stance. Okay. We've known this as a decision before. You can't move something into place to build a stance. Okay, here's where usually I'd have Craig Stadler come in and give a little talk about his cow. But you can't put a movable obstruction into a position to make a stroke. If it's there, and you happen to be lucky you can stand on it, that's fine. You're not improving anything, are you? It's just there. So if it's in place, you're fine, but if you put it in position and make a stroke from it, you're going to be in trouble. Moving loose impediments or movable obstructions into place. So you can't like take a bunch of leaves and put them down there and stand yourself up or either. I mean, they're not going to let you do that as well. Altering the surface of the ground. So you can't dig a hole out of the fairway, so you can get a little bit lower to the ball or anything like that. Okay? The player must not take any of these actions to improve the condition. So there's the summary of everything that we just kind of talked about right there. Okay? Penalty for breach there is the general penalty. So you lose the whole match play and get a 2-stroke penalty in stroke play. Any questions on any of those actions specifically? I'm explaining it that well, huh? That's good. Oh, of course, Keith.
When you're taking a drop in a relief area, you cannot remove any loose impediments before the drop.
Can we move loose impediments if we're taking a drop in a relief area? And the answer is yes, because you're allowed to if your ball is in play. So you're allowed to also before you put a ball into play. That's fine. That's not improving the area. All right, so let's talk about some of the exceptions that is going to get us not penalized. So fairly searching, like we just talked about in Rule 7, as long as you're fairly searching for your ball and you improve your area, or excuse me, your conditions affecting the stroke, you're okay, as long as it's a fair search. So what is a fair search? So let's talk about that. So if we move sand and water, moving or bending grass, bushes, branches, even breaking when it's reasonable. So these things that we just talked about, as long as you do it fairly, you're going to be okay. Okay? Reasonable actions to remove loose impediments and movable obstructions. If you improve your area, you're going to be fine. If your ball moves, you're still going to be penalized, and you've got to replace it. But if you improve your area because you're removing loose impediments in a reasonable way, you're going to be okay. Okay? If you're marking the spot of the ball and if you're lifting it and replacing it, so like if your ball's in a bunker and you mark it and you lift it and it maybe took a little bit of a bump of sand behind your ball away, as long as you're reasonably marking your ball, you'll be okay. You're not improving your area at that point. Okay, and there's an example that we were talking about there. Okay, so if we're replacing our ball as well, if you're putting your ball back down and somehow you improve your lie, you're going to be okay as long as you're reasonably putting your ball back down. So what does this mean you can't do? Pressing the ball down into the ground. Okay, people want to do that like if it's on a slope, if you want to press it in there, you're not allowed to do that. So that would actually improve the conditions affecting your stroke. Even though it sounds like it might worsen it, but it's actually improving your conditions. Okay? You're allowed to ground the club lightly, even if it's in sand in the general area. Okay? If it's in sand in a bunker, can we ground our club lightly behind the ball? No, that hasn't changed. Okay. Okay. Here's another one that should get a couple of chuckles. Well, once wasn't good enough. I had to make sure it was completely clean. So obviously, you're going to be penalized in that situation. Okay. Pressing the club down on the ground is not allowed, and when the ball's in the bunker, again, like we just mentioned, touching the sand right in front of or behind the ball is not allowed. So no change there. You're allowed to firmly place your feet in taking a stance, including a reasonable amount of digging with the feet in sand and loose soil. And again, there's that word reasonable. Is that okay? Yeah. Yeah. That's very reasonable. If the guy starts, kind of doing the moving around like that, that's really not very reasonable. If he really starts doing the twist and getting down in there deep, we might have to see what's going on in that situation. But again, it's going to be the judgment of whether or not we think it's reasonable or not if a penalty applies. It's a fact-based rule. Okay? We're allowed to fairly take a stance. So if you are fairly taking your stance in the least intrusive way and somehow some improvement happens, you're okay if you fairly take your stance. Again, this isn't a change. This was taken care of by a decision in the old rules, but now it's incorporated into the rules. Okay? When we're doing so, you're not necessarily entitled to a normal stance or swing. Okay? There's nothing in the rules that says you get to clear all that crap out of your way so you get a nice, smooth, easy swing and a nice lie. You're not entitled to it. Play the ball as it lies. Okay? You must use the least intrusive course of action, and see that is directly in the rule now. It's not a decision. It is directly talked about in the rule. Okay? Again, Here's the decision that was talked about before, now incorporated into the rule. All right. If you make a stroke and you improve that area, obviously we're not going to have a situation there that you're going to be penalized. So we've got a player here whose ball is in this bush. If he clears out that bush and making a stroke, he's not penalized. Seems pretty obvious, but the rule does cover it. Okay? Or if you take a backswing for a stroke and make that stroke. Okay? So there's a little caveat there to that backswing. Everybody see that branch that came down? He moved that branch out of the way, but he finished the stroke. How would he get a penalty? Takes it back, stops, goes, oh crap. Now he's in trouble. Now he's in trouble. Okay. But when the ball is in the bunker, touching the sand in the bunker and taking the backswing is not allowed. So we've talked about this a little bit before, but that is not allowed. I thought I had a video there, but I don't. Okay. So as soon as you're taking a backswing in the bunker and you scrape a little bit of sand, that is a penalty. You can't get out of that one. That has not changed. That is still the same rule. Okay, here's some more exceptions to this rule. The teeing area. Okay, we're allowed to improve the area and take some big chunks out of the ground in the teeing area and put our ball up on it. Okay, we can use a tee. We can move, bend, or break growing or attached natural objects within the teeing area. Okay, so like if you have something overhanging it that is not growing in the teeing area, you're not allowed to improve that. Just better tee off on the other side of the teeing area. You're allowed to alter the surface of the ground. You can remove dew, frost, or water, so you can take your towel out and do that if you really wanted to. There would be a reasonable delay situation possibly if you were really clearing it out. All right? Everybody knows this one, hopefully. Laura Davies apparently doesn't have a very good tee budget. Pounds into the ground, creates a little indentation, puts her ball on top of it, and somehow hits it 300 yards right down the middle. Mine would be low and cutting to the right. I can't hit a driver off the deck, but this is fine. She's allowed to do this, okay, because it's in the teeing area. The putting green has a lot of allowances that you could improve your conditions affecting the stroke, including removing sand and loose soil. Again, not loose impediments by definition, but they may be moved on the putting green or in the teeing area. You can repair damage. So we've talked a little bit about this. The little USGA announcements that came out this morning actually included also hail damage. You can repair hail damage. So it's just kind of a clarification. So if we have like a ball mark or animal hoof print, you can improve that.
On the putting green, you talk about removing the sand and soil.
Uh-huh.
What's the difference between that and the guy with the dew?
Okay, so what's the difference between moving dew and sand and loose soil? Well, the main difference is the rules allow the removal of sand and loose soil on the putting green. No, but yeah, as far as like a theory behind that one, if you're going to have moisture on a golf course everywhere, you know, and it probably is going to save time if we don't allow the player to do that. That would be my thought on that. So just it's going to be a time issue. It's kind of part of the game. You know, it's part of the golf course. Sand and loose soil can be out of position, but dew is hard to be considered out of position, if that makes sense. Like if you get a bunch of sand splashed up onto a green from a bunker, it seems like fair to let the player get it out of the way, but dew is going to be everywhere. So that's how I look at it. Okay, there's certain bunker permissions that we can do. Dave?
Just to really make sure I get it straight, because it's not the way it used to be. In the teeing area, all these things you can do, even if it's not, even if it's after the initial shot to teeing off, it
Right.
all winds up in the teeing area somehow.
Right. So these special permissions in the teeing area Dave's asking about is, can we do this when the ball is in play in the teeing area? And the answer is yes. Yeah. Keep in mind those changes that we had for the teeing area are uniform for all situations now. Whether the ball's on a tee and not in play, or not in play on the ground because we haven't made a stroke to start the hole, or we've made a stroke and it's returned to the teeing area, or we've whiffed, all the teeing area rules apply. Okay, so this is one situation where your ball's in play and you can move the dew, you can move the loose impediments, you can pick up the ball and do what you want with it, because the teeing area rules are very different now. Yes?
This actually came up, it sounded like a dumb question, but heavy dew, is that considered temporary water?
No. Is heavy dew considered temporary water? No. Dew specifically is not temporary water. So it says that in the definition, I believe. But good question if it's really thick. I mean, but no, it will not be. All right, so in a bunker, what can we do? Okay? You can smooth sand to care for the course after a ball is played from the bunker is outside the bunker. So I've got a little animation here. We've got a player who's ball in the bunker, and he thinks his only best play here is to actually come backwards out of play here. So he's going to hit this ball, get it back in play, and then conveniently walk in the bunker for me so that we can make this an example. And he's going to smooth that, and it's on his line of play. That's okay, because once you play a ball from a bunker and the ball is outside that bunker, you can smooth those footprints without restriction. So this is an example of an exception to improving your line of play. Okay. Moving a natural object to see if it's loose, we're allowed to do that. The player in here is moving natural objects, trying to get out of the way just to see if it happens to find the golf ball. But if you also want to check and see if it's a loose impediment, you're welcome to kind of tug at it a little bit, okay, and see if it is attached. But just don't be excessive. Make reasonable efforts.
So if you were to hit your shot short of the bunker like that, you could then smooth the bunker?
So if you were to hit your shot in the example before, if we hit a shot that came to rest before the bunker and there was footprints in there, can we rake those? No. No. The rule that we talked about was your ball playing from a bunker out of a bunker. Now you can smooth the entire bunker. So when your ball is played from the bunker, that rule specifically allows you to do that. But you'd be improving your lie in that situation. Or improving your line of play, excuse me. Okay. But if we're checking on that natural object, but if the object is found to be growing or attached, it must stay attached and be returned as nearly as possible to its original position. So if you're moving grass and checking it to see if it's loose, and you move it out of your way, you've got to move it back. And it must be returned as nearly as possible to that original position. Okay? Any other questions on what we just talked about, those exceptions and the violations? Like I said, there's a lot in that rule. Bill?
Just to build on this gentleman's comments, if the ball was in the bunker, your ball was in the bunker, the other ball was in the bunker also, but he played first,
Right.
just because he's ready, let's say.
Sure.
Is he still allowed to rate that bunker?
Okay, so if we...
Because it'd be improving.
Right. So if we have a ball in the bunker that is played in another ball in the bunker and the conditions are improved, can we rake that? And the answer is yes, and we're going to see that coming up forward here in this rule. That you can, if your sand is over your golf ball or some footprints are on your line, he can rake those for you and get that done. And you can rake those yourself actually as well, but I'd rather have him do it. So. If it's your partner, that's going to be a different situation, but I think that you're going to still be allowed to do it, but let me check on that one. I think you're allowed to do that because your ball was at rest, and you were entitled to that lie that it was at rest. So let me double check that one. I'm 95% sure, so I'm using virtual certainty there that we're good. So, all right, let's talk about some things that we can do and undo them to not be penalized. This is a new little concept in the rule. So, some examples of things that may be restored. So, moving, bending, or breaking things growing or attached. Okay, there are ways that we can get those back into place and be okay. Moving, bending, or breaking immovable obstructions, integral objects, or boundary objects. A loose impediment into position, or moving a movable obstruction into a position. Those all may be restored. Example, like you saw the video or the slide of the kid standing on the bench trying to hit the shot out of the tree. If he moves that bench into place and then takes his stance, he's still not penalized. He might realize it and goes, oh yeah, I can't do that. Moving it out of the way keeps you from getting a penalty. And the example that is a different one is the boundary object. We had an example of a question before where Doug's ball came to rest against the boundary object and he moved it. If he plays the stroke, he gets a penalty, but if he puts it back in the same position, he's okay. But he can't replace it with another one. So like if he pulls the boundary stick out and then goes and gets another one and puts it back in there, he gets penalized. It has to be the original object that was there. Okay. Some things that may not be restored is altering the surface of the ground. So if you take the Laura Davies example in the middle of the fairway and pound it in there to create a bump for some reason, and you go, oh, I can't do that, and you try to smooth it out, too late. You cannot fix that. You're penalized in that situation. Removing or pressing down that loose soil or the dew, frost, or water. So once you move those items out of the way, you can't just put them back and be okay. You're going to be penalized. All right, so let's go through the rule and see if we can get it all figured out, how we can fix ourselves from getting penalized. If the player has improved the conditions affecting the stroke by moving, bending, or breaking these objects, what do? There's no penalty if before making the stroke the player eliminates that improvement by restoring the original conditions in the ways allowed. Okay, so we need those original conditions restored in this way. And we'll talk about it here. But if the player improves the conditions affecting the stroke by taking any of these actions covered by what we just talked about, the moving of the loose impediments or the altering the surface of the ground or the removing of the dew, you cannot avoid penalty. It just says it right there in the rule. The example of the table, here's where it says it in the rule. You cannot avoid penalty. Right there. Okay, so how do we restore this if we want to get ourselves off the hook? Okay, some certain limitations. But first of all, the improvement must be eliminated, pretty obvious. We must use the original object. Okay, so whatever we've done with whatever object is, that object has to come back. Not a similar, but that object. Okay? Here's that example again. Okay? She makes this stroke, she's going to be penalized. How does she fix it? We talked about. Just move out, let it come back into position, and then take a different stance. She'll be fine. Okay. If the improvement is not eliminated, such as when a boundary, object, branch has been bent or broken in a significant way so that it cannot be returned to the original position, you're not going to avoid penalty. So if in removing that out of bounds stake, Doug breaks it, and he can't get it back to its original spot, he's going to be penalized. Right? And you cannot use anything other than the original object, such as a different or an additional object. Example, putting a different stake like I mentioned in a hole, or tying a branch into place. If you happen to have some dental floss with you or something, and I'm going to tie this back into the original place. You can't do that. Okay? Using tape to repair a broken boundary object or branch. So you break that boundary object and you tape it back up, sorry. You are still, you're not going to avoid penalty in that situation. All right. Current equity concept. Here's what we were just talking about with Bill's question. Like if you have a lie that you are entitled to, and something changes it, here's where we're going to deal with it. Okay, so if you have conditions affecting your stroke is altered by any person other than the player, which in this case, remember, refers to your partner as well. Any animal, an artificial object. Oops, sorry, I clicked it too hard. Those are your things. So if it's altered by these things, we can fix it. Okay? The restoration is not permitted restoration is not permitted when this improvement is done by the player, a natural object, or natural forces. Okay, so wind, rain, and the player itself, if you do something that improves your area, you can't restore it. Okay? So if the conditions cannot be restored, if we, for some reason, we've got the Happy Gilmore example here. Really good movie when it comes to the rules of golf. Very, very, very point on. A lot of sarcasm in that one if you guys have not seen that movie. So if you cannot restore these conditions, we're going to lift and replace the ball in the nearest spot that is no nearer the hole, in the most similar conditions, and within one club length of the original lie. Okay? Must stay in the same area of the golf course. So if one club length takes you from the general area to the putting green, you're not allowed to go to the putting green, even if that one club length is within it. It specifically says you have to stay in the same area of the golf course as the original lie. Okay, here's some examples of when restoration is allowed. Player's line of play is worsened by a pitch mark in the general area that was made by a ball played by someone else after the player's ball came to rest. This is something that we've known before. This is an example. If your ball is laying on the fringe of the green and another ball comes in and creates a pitch mark right in front of your ball, you are allowed to repair that pitch mark. That is fine. The player's lie or area of intended stance or intended swing is worsened when another player's stroke creates a divot or deposits sand, soil, grass, or other material on or around his ball. The example of your ball in a bunker and another player plays a bunker shot and it affects your lie, you're allowed to recreate your lie. You're okay there. If a player's ball in a bunker lies close enough to another player's ball in the bunker and the other player's stance or swing in making the stroke worsens one or more of the player's conditions affecting the stroke, so there's the example where we can rake the footprints. Okay, like if my ball is right next to the player who's playing behind me and he's got his footprints here and he makes a stroke, okay, I can fix all those footprints that are around my ball in that situation. This allows it right here. In all such situations, the player is allowed to restore conditions without penalty, but you don't have to. It's not a requirement. You're not supposed to have only your lie. So if it changes, you're allowed to accept it or you're allowed to fix it. Yep.
So on the second bullet point, we talked about you can't move loose soil or sand in the general area.
Right?
But if someone's taking a shot and say they were behind you and they hit and they sprayed sand or
Yes. So if you have a ball in the general area and a player makes a stroke and creates some sand or soil that comes around your golf ball, you are allowed to clear that out of the way because your ball was at rest with a certain lie. Yep. Any other time you can't move that sand and loose soil.
Can you mark your ball to clean it up and then replace it?
In that situation, no, because you don't have the entitlement to mark your ball and lift it. You have the entitlement to move that stuff out of your way, but you're not allowed to mark it. Now, if you did put some sand and stuff on the golf ball, you may be able to clean it. So let me look into that one. Doug, if you want to look that one up. Yeah, you can move the divot in that situation, yeah, because it's a loose impediment. It's a loose impediment. Yeah. But when I think about that, that's the exception that you can mark your ball if it gets dirtied. But I think that that's correct, and Doug will confirm that with me. So.
If you're on the edge of the green and there's already sand around you, and a player hits a bunker shot that puts more sand out there, presumably you're allowed to remove that sand, but how do you differentiate?
You don't. So if you're on the fringe with some sand around it, and then a player plays a bunker shot and puts more sand out there, you are entitled to move the sand that was put on your golf ball. But we're not going to go grain by grain in this situation. We're going to be reasonable and let you get all that sand out of the way.
But if you tried to remove all of it, so if you're like the dude,
Right.
you sit there and make it perfect.
Right. I think we would side with the player in this one and just say we can't differentiate which sand was there, which sand wasn't. We would just say you can clear the sand. So.
At any time, if you're in a bunker or in a general area and the person behind you is real close to your ball, in say bunker situations too, can you mark your ball to get it out of their way because it is hindering their
Right. So if you're in a general area or a bunker and your ball is in front of somebody who's going to play, yes, you can mark it and get it out of the way. Right. If in a certain situation is if that player wants you to do that, if that player thinks it's interfering with it, you can ask them. You can say, hey, is this interfering with you? And if he says yes, then you're allowed. But you can't do it on your own. You can't just go pick up your ball and say, well, I think this is in your way. You're not allowed to do that. So, but there is a situation that you can, but there is a situation that you can't. So. Is interference from a golf ball allowed in a penalty area? Yes. Yeah, so if your ball is interfering with another ball in the penalty area, it is still falling underneath the rule of interference, and you're allowed to mark and move it out of the way. All right, good questions there. All right, so talking about 8.2 a little bit further, in addition to 8.1, the player must not deliberately alter other conditions where the ball might go after the next stroke. So not only where your ball is, but where you think it might go, you can't go fix that. What's some examples of that we've had before? Like if you're in a greenside bunker, playing up to the green there, and there's a bunker on the other side that hasn't been raked, and you go over there and rake that bunker because you think your ball might be sculled out in there, you can't do that. You cannot do that. This rule specifically says where the ball might go after the next stroke. Where the ball might go if it moves before the next stroke. Okay, what's an example of that? Your ball, like maybe being on a slope, and you're worried about it moving. Okay, if it moves on its own, what do we do? If it moves on its own, we play with it where it ends up, right? So if the ball's in the general area and it just moves on its own, we just play for where it goes. If you think it's going to roll down into a bush and you see a couple of branches there, that you're like, well, I better move those branches just in case it moves. That's what this is covering, and you cannot do that. Okay, where your ball might go before even if you make a stroke. Okay, so this rule does not apply to the player's deliberate actions. The next rule is going to apply to that. Okay, so you'll see the difference here when we get into the difference between deliberately things like that. So deliberately deflect or stop his own ball, or to deliberately affect any physical conditions to affect where the ball might come to rest. Okay, so after the player's conditions affecting the stroke, or excuse me, alter the player's conditions affecting the stroke. So there's a deliberate, and then there's an accidental, and then there's ways that you are trying to improve where your ball might end up. Okay, and so a deliberate deflection or stopping his ball is a ball in motion. This is not a ball in motion. Okay, understand that difference? So there'll be a different rule that we would look under. Okay. A player must not deliberately take any actions listed in those rules that we just, or listed in those examples that we talked about, to alter any such physical conditions to affect where the player's ball might go or come to rest after the next stroke, a later stroke, or where the player's stroke might go. Okay. There's the example we just talked about when the ball is on a steep slope and the player's concerned that it might roll into a bush. Cannot alter anything where it possibly could end up. Okay, some examples of players' deliberate actions to improve other physical conditions affecting his or her own play. So, again, this applies to altering the physical conditions. So when the player's ball is at rest on the course, or when he or she does not have a ball in play. So either way, if your ball's in play or a ball is not in play, and you're taking care of this situation by affecting where your ball might end up, you're going to be penalized. Okay? Examples of players' actions listed in 8.1. There would be a breach of 8.2 if they're taken deliberately to improve other physical conditions. Deliberately is underlined because, like, if you happen to be walking along and step down a divot, and your ball comes to rest on that divot afterwards, this was not a deliberate action. You didn't, unless you went over there and just stat it down. Okay, so this is where this rule is just covering that, the difference between deliberate and accidental. Okay. Player's ball is just short of a putting green, and although his or her line of play is a straight line of the hole, the player is concerned his or her ball might come to rest in a nearby bunker. So before making the stroke, the player smooths the sand in the bunker to make sure that the good lie, if the shot happens to go there. Example of a violation. Okay. If the player reasonably thinks that his ball can end up in the bunker, you can't go improve that bunker. Okay. Player's ball lies at the top of a steep hill because this player is concerned the wind might blow the ball down the hill away from the hole where he or she is able to play it. The player deliberately presses down the grass at the bottom of the hill just in case the ball comes to rest there. Just seems like a violation, right? Okay? So if your ball is going to end up in a spot, possibly, and you go fix that area, you're going to be penalized under 8.2.
We talked earlier on the example of bowling, like you press down where there's a divot or a mark. Then you said, well, but if there was something 2 yards in front of you, and they were in the fairway getting a wedge or something,
right,
that would be okay.
That this is not going to improve. The question is, like, if it's a longer shot. If you fix a divot right in front of your golf ball for a long shot, as long as it doesn't affect your lie, it's not going to affect your lie play. Okay?
But you talked about, example of stomping down grass that was behind you, the ball might roll down the hill.
Right.
Don't you also have the possibility you could...
There is a possibility, but is it likely? Okay. Is it likely that the player, and also this is a good question to bring up, skill level is involved too as well. It is. Like if you have a high handicapper in in a fairway bunker and has 150 yards to the green and is a 30 handicap and there's some footprints in front of them and he rakes those, there's a chance his ball's probably going to stay in that bunker because he doesn't have any skill. He could be penalized to where a scratch player might not be. Okay, so it's, again, the word likely is involved and reasonable. If you have a scratch player in that same bunker with a perfect lie, making a 200-yard shot, and there's a couple of footprints on his line, and if he rakes those, he's going to be okay. So I know it sounds a little bit different, but skill level is involved because we're talking about the likeliness of where the ball is going to end up. Okay? There are exceptions, and that's if your action was specifically to care for the course. Okay, so again, we're talking about deliberate versus accidental. If you are raking a bunker and you turn around and, oh, that's on my line of play, if you did it specifically for the care of the course, this rule allows it. Okay, so again, we have to trust the player's judgment on this one. Doug?
In regards to that question earlier, the player could mark his ball, clean the sand off his ball, replace it.
Great. So in regards to the question earlier where we had some sand deposited on a ball that was at rest from a previous stroke, the player can mark it, clean it, and replace it in that situation, as well as still clean out the sand on top of that. Thanks, Doug. All right. So again, there's no penalties for replacing a divot or smoothing footprints in the bunker that we talked about. So that's, again, a situation if we're caring for the course, you're going to be okay. But it's got to be specifically for that. You can't say, I'm caring for the course, but we know it's fixing the area where the ball might come to rest. Again, we're going to trust the player's judgment on this. We can ask follow-up questions if you don't trust the answer. So, all right, so 8.3 covers when you are affecting somebody else's ball in the conditions. Not just yours, but somebody else's ball. So the player must not deliberately improve or worsen the conditions of affecting the stroke of another player, alter other physical conditions to affect where that another player's ball might end up after the stroke or even before that next stroke. So any of those situations there that you can't do to yourself, for your own benefit, you can't do it to alter somebody else's, whether it's a benefit or a hindrance. So if you're even doing it to help the player, you're just a great Samaritan golfer. You're going to be penalized. Okay? You got to let the player play his own game.
But you cannot ask the other player to do the same thing for you, right?
Right. If you were to ask the player to fix your conditions, you're on the hook for the penalty as well as the other player in that situation. Yep. All right, the exception, again, is actions to care for the course. There's no penalty, again, if they were specifically and only for the care of the golf course. Okay? And this rule covers a player's deliberate actions to alter physical conditions to affect another player's ball. So, again, the word deliberate's in there. If you accidentally step on somebody's line, we can fix it and there's no penalty. If you deliberately step on somebody's line, that's what this is talking about. That's a penalty. Ramon?
By asking the player to talk with the line,
Uh-huh.
and he says, no, I can't do that, is there a penalty?
So if we ask a player, just merely ask a player to help our line out, and he refuses, is there any penalty in that situation? No. We're not going to be penalized in that situation.
It's not like advice.
No, it's definitely not advice. It's definitely not advice. Okay, so again, this situation does not apply to a player's actions to deliberately deflect or stop another player's ball in motion, deliberately alter any physical conditions to affect where a ball might come to rest. So here's where the new rules are written a little differently, in the fact that if you're trying to find a ruling with a ball in motion, this rule says, hey, you're in the wrong place. This is where you got to find it. So the rules kind of direct us in the right place. So if a ball is in motion, Rule 8 is not applicable. We're talking about Rule 11 then. So it tells you where to go. So that's what this is talking about. Okay. You cannot improve or worsen the conditions affecting the stroke of another player, as we mentioned. So it's just altering them. Whether it's good or bad, you cannot alter them. Okay? And you cannot alter those conditions where that ball will come to rest, where it might come to rest. Everything's the same for you that it was for you is now same for another player. And what does it say? It says another player. It says, so that includes what? A partner? Or somebody in your group, another player in your group, which was formerly known as a fellow competitor, which no longer is. Somebody in another group, if you can't do that either. It's just another player. Okay. Penalty for breach of this rule is the general penalty, so loss of whole match play, 2 strokes and stroke play. All right. That's a pretty big rule there. A lot going on in it. We asked some pretty good questions about what's considered, playing the course as it lies, what can we do, what can we not do, certain different situations. Does anybody have any other further questions on anything? Bruce?
Excuse me, I didn't quite understand the example you used when there's a difference between a low handicap player and
Okay.
a scratch player.
Okay. All right, so he's asking what's the difference between a low handicap and a high handicap player. Skill level is a component when it...
I mean, I didn't understand the example when you used
Right.
the situation.
Right, the situation of a fairway bunker we had? Yeah, so the situation was skill level is involved in determining where a ball will come to rest. Okay, the bunker is an example, but it could apply anywhere. And if a player has a high level of skill and they have a very simple shot, that's going to have a different implication on where the ball is going to end up is to a high handicapper. And so the rule may be, not necessarily, but may be applied differently in that situation for a high handicapper versus a low handicapper. As long as we have reasonable belief that ball's not going to come to rest there, he's going to be fine. Now, if he breaks this bunker and his ball ends up coming to rest there, he does chunk it or something like that, he's going to be on the hook for a penalty. He is going to be on the hook for a penalty. So it's kind of a weird situation there, but it's, again, the bottom line is to come up with the fact of the situation. Where do we reasonably think the ball is going to come to rest? Okay, so if 95% of the time this high handicapper is going to leave it in the bunker, we know that he better not fix that bunker. And if 95% of the time the low handicapper is going to hit it up on the green, he's going to be okay. So, you bet.
Could you please define cleaning the ball?
Cleaning the ball. Okay, we'll define cleaning the ball real quick. It's pretty simple. It's basically wiping anything off of the golf ball, including dirt, grass, anything adhering to it. Okay, if you take it off of the golf ball, you've cleaned it. Okay?
Could you some people carry a towel with them?
Sure.
Using a towel, is that prohibited?
You can use a towel to clean a golf ball when you're allowed to clean the golf ball, but when you're not allowed to clean the golf ball, you can't use any method to clean it. So, for example, if we have a ball laying in the general area in the middle of the fairway and a blade of grass is on top of that golf ball adhered to it, can we move that blade of grass? No. That is defining cleaning of a golf ball. Even though it might not be washing it, but you are cleaning the golf ball by taking something off of it. And that's what this does, this definition covers. And there's any method that you use to clean a golf ball. And for another good example on that is if we have a ball that is interfering with play and we do the two-finger pinch out of the way, okay, if you drop it and it cleans off some of the golf ball, you could be on the hook there for cleaning your golf ball. We got to kind of look at the facts of the situation. That's why people set it to the side, because if you put it in your pocket, you could also rub some dirt off of it. And so that would be cleaning the golf ball. Even though if you didn't mean to, you did. So that's why you see people do the two-finger pinch or set it off to the side. So that's what it means.
In regards to that high handicap versus low handicapper, you know, you've got a scratch guy and a point handicap both hitting from 50 yards out. Obviously, maybe the skilled guy is going to have a chance to try and make the shot. They both hit in. Some guys up the green. Are they not allowed to go ahead and fix their divots if they're considered, you know, taking care of the course? But that high handicapper, that skilled player, has a chance to make it, but fixing that divot then gives them a better opportunity to make it.
Gotcha. So the question is, a low handicap player has a 50-yard shot with a reasonable, is kind of a stretch there of making it, but yeah, he can make it. Can he go up and fix pitch marks on the green? And within the rules, he would be allowed to fix the pitch marks, but we might have unreasonable delay. And so that's where kind of we have to balance what's going on in there. The rules of golf allow you to fix pitch marks on the green.
One of the reasons I say that is because you have Phil who's going to go out there and say, all right, I'm 100 yards out.
Sure.
Try and make it. He can do that.
Right.
Go pull the pin, fix a couple divots up there.
Right. And the rules allow that.
Apply to, you know, our everyday golf here as well.
Right. Now, your question was about a high versus a low handicapper, and it actually would apply to both, because you're allowed to fix pitch marks on the putting surface. So that's fine. But the question would be the unreasonable delay. And so that situation, it doesn't really cover in Rule 8 of improving the area because it's allowed underneath a different rule. But your question is very good to point out, again, the skill level. Like if we're talking about a shot where there's pitch marks on the fringe or something like that, you know, we'd have to probably say no to both players in that situation too as well, because unless there's some reasonable way that he can make it and fixing that pitch mark would, you know, be allowed, but I can't really see a situation there. So. Are you allowed to ask another player to fix a pitch mark for you, as long as it's within the rules, like where that pitch mark is. So like if my ball is at rest on the fringe and there's a pitch mark here, and I ask you to come fix it, and you do fix it, we're both getting penalized, because we're not allowed to do that in the rules. Because you're penalized under 8.3, and I'm going to be penalized under 8.2. Because I'm making an action that's affecting my stroke and improving it, but you're also affecting mine as well, so we're both going to get the general penalty there in that situation. Yep. Otherwise, there would be a lot of partnerships on the first tee of like, hey, you're going to help me all day today, and that type of thing. So, but another good question there. All right, I got a question for you. In a stroke play event, Jackie is fairly searching for her ball in some tall grass. While looking for her ball, she is moving some growing reeds and accidentally breaks off a large weed that improves the area that she intends to swing her club. What is the ruling? Hopefully we know what this is now. Is she penalized? Okay. Is she penalized provided she can return the weed? Does she have to do that? Yeah. If it's broken fairly, she gets to deal with the advantage. She gets to keep it. Okay. She's not penalized for anything there. Okay. If she intentionally breaks off that weed, she's going to be penalized, even if she thinks she can get it back into position, which I don't know how you're going to do a broken weed back into position. So, tape, we've talked about tape. You can't do tape. So does everybody understand that? Even though she improved her conditions affecting her stroke, she did it fairly searching for her ball, so no penalty. All right, quiz review time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. To identify his ball. Right. Okay, so the question is, we had a ball come to rest in a 4-cat. He noticed where it came to rest, knew it was his ball. Specifically in this rule, it does say if another player or another person knows where your ball comes to rest, it's been identified, right? So in this situation, at least in 2019, I know for a fact this player is going to be penalized because it has been identified as his golf ball. We know, we watched it sail through the air, come to rest. That's your golf ball. So this rule says you can't improve beyond that one. It's been identified. Yeah, it probably was a penalty this year as well, but I know definitely in 2019, it's specifically in the rule, it says you can't do that because it has been identified already. So, Dave?
Okay, so back to the situation where somebody hits it into the weeds.
Okay.
And they're rushing around and they're pushing things back and they see a ball down on the ground.
Okay.
That's in the tall grass.
Sure.
At that point, I would think they would need to mark that spot and reach down and identify it, not like push all the grass down around it.
Okay.
I mean,
So-
where's the line?
All right, so the question is, we have a ball and some weeds and did some heavy searching and found it way down in there. And Dave is asking, why doesn't that player, why would he be allowed to move those weeds and why doesn't he have to mark it and look at it and stuff like that? As long as he's fairly trying to identify his golf ball. That's what this rule is covering, okay? The definition of what is going to allow us to do this is based on what the player's actions are. We have to reasonably believe that he's doing something wrong to penalize him, okay? And we're going to talk to the player about that. You know, if I get down there in the situation that was just brought up there by Dick, if we know it's his ball, now his actions are unreasonable. But this situation, he's still trying to identify it. We're going to let him do that. Now, if he's just bending them, kind of doing this fine, but if he's really turning them down, you know, and flattening them, even if he doesn't know his ball and it turns out to be his ball, and now I'm applying a penalty in that situation. Yep.
Kind of tough question, Mark. That one where somebody saw the ball, went into long grass,
Uh-huh.
said, your ball, that's your ball.
Uh-huh.
Walks up and he plays it based on that,
Mhm.
and it turns out to not be his ball.
Okay. So we have in this example where a four caddy saw a ball and identified it and said, this is your ball, and the player goes up and hits it and it turns out it's not his ball, the player still played a wrong ball. Okay, the player is responsible for hitting his own golf ball. The player is responsible, and the rules officials that are here are going to like this part that I talk about. In the rule, it says the player is responsible to find his own golf ball. It's not the responsibility of our officials to find the golf ball, even though the players will tell you it is. Okay, but it's not.
Say that
Yeah.
the guy identified the ball so he can accept that.
Right, but he still has to hit his own golf ball.
Right.
That's the rule.
So that's what he should not do.
But the rule says if it's identified, and it really covers the situation if you hit it right down the middle of the fairway. That's an obvious example. Okay, a ball can positively be identified by another person if we know it. If we know it. So like in this example, this person saw the ball come to rest. Okay, if I hit a ball into weeds and you see it go into the weeds, you're like, Todd, that's your golf ball. I saw it. It's identified, but I'm still not off the hook of hitting a wrong ball if you've misidentified it.
Right. So don't I have the option that, hey, I want to make sure that
Yes.
that's my ball?
Yes. Do I have the option of checking it? It's my ball? Always. If you have reasonable belief that it's not your golf ball, you can identify it through the procedure. You don't have to accept it. You don't have to accept it. Now, make sure everybody understands that difference. Okay, a ball can be identified by another person, but if the player still has a reasonable doubt to whether or not it's his ball, he can go through the procedure of identifying it. He doesn't have to say, okay, it's my ball. Oh, wrong ball penalty. No. Make sure you understand that difference. Pat.
Wait a minute. I thought you just said to Dick's question that yes, it would be that guy should have been penalized.
For improving the area around his ball.
2018 rules, I can't, well, he didn't say improve the law.
That's what he was talking about. Improving, he was moving the grass and pushing it down. That was his question.
Okay. Well,
That's where he's getting penalty.
improving the law.
Right. He's improving the conditions affecting his stroke. Because we know it's his golf ball. Okay? Now, if he does not...
He is entitled to still identify his
Yes.
golf ball.
Yes.
As long as he does it fairly.
Right.
If he's
Right. If that player had reasonable belief that it wasn't his golf ball, but in this question that Dick brought up here, it sounds like the player's just like, okay, I'm pushing it down. I'm identifying my golf ball. There wasn't enough reasonable belief there in that situation. But if that player had any doubt, he could say to Dick, says, I'm not sure that's it. I'm going to identify it. But then if he does even unreasonable actions, he's still getting penalized.
As you say, under the old rules or the new rules, if somebody tells me that's my ball, I'm still identifying.
Absolutely. You're still responsible to hit your own golf ball.
I can't be penalized
Again,
for identifying.
no.
No. I can be penalized
You
if
can
I
be-
improve my lie.
Or playing a wrong ball. Yes. Yes. You're still on the hook for those penalties. Just because somebody identifies your golf ball and you have doubt doesn't mean that is your golf ball. You still can go through the procedure.
What he did in that case was he moved enough weeds
Exactly, and that's how I understood the question to be termed, is that he was moving the weeds out of the way. Okay, the identification of a golf ball is a different rule. Okay, so if anybody wants to get more into that afterwards, we can talk about it, but let's go into the quiz. All right, speaking of identification, a ball may be identified by a player without an identifying mark on it. True or false? True. True. As long as the ball can positively be identified. And if there's a way that we can do it, we can identify it. A player must announce his intention to identify his ball before marking it and lifting it. False. It's no longer allowed, or excuse me, no longer required. Not a bad idea, just to let your people in your group know what's going on, or your opponent, but you don't have to. A player can never be penalized if the ball is moved during a search. False. Yeah, excessive actions may lead to penalty. If you accidentally move your ball, no penalty. But if you're doing something silly like swinging a golf club through some really high weeds and you move your ball, you're going to be penalized. Now, just putting your golf club in those weeds and kind of poking around is going to be okay. But it's not excessive in that situation. A ball being searched for that is moved by the player will be replaced, may be substituted. True or false? False. The original ball must be used in replacing a golf ball. Okay? There are some situations in replacing a golf ball that you can substitute it, and they are obvious. It's like if I have a ball in play in the general area, and Doug is a player in my group, and he walks by and kicks my ball, whether it's by accident or on purpose, doesn't matter, and it goes into a lake, okay, I don't have to get that ball back and put it back here. I can replace my ball with a substitution. So, if I did it myself, I can still substitute it. I can. But I might be on the hook for a penalty if I wasn't searching for it. So, okay. A fair search may include breaking a branch in a tree, resulting in no penalty. True. Yeah, as long as we're fairly searching for it and it breaks a branch, there's going to be no penalty. All right. In stroke play, Todd is fairly searching for his ball in the general area, and he accidentally kicks it. Not sure where the ball was, and using his best judgment, he estimates the spot and drops the original ball at that point, and it rolls a club length away from that estimated point, but still in the relief area. So which of the following is correct? The answer is B. Okay, I can lift that drop ball and place it back on the estimated spot with no penalty, but I can't drop it to get it back into play correctly. I have to replace it. Okay, if I played that ball, what would be the penalty? Be the general penalty. Okay, it's not a one-stroke penalty, and there's a very rare situation that it would be a one-stroke penalty, and it's never going to happen. Of course, I say that. I would get a one-stroke penalty if I dropped it and it came to rest on the exact spot that I was supposed to replace it. That would be a one-stroke penalty because I would be replacing the ball incorrectly is what the ruling would be. That's never going to happen, right? And that's why I put there and it rolled a club length away so that you guys knew that it wasn't on the exact spot. That's the one-stroke penalty. But because I didn't place the ball and I dropped it, I get the general penalty in that situation. Everybody good with that? Cool. Shouldn't have dropped it. That would have taken care of it. In stroke plays, Doug's ball is at rest in the general area. He brushes away some sand that improves the conditions affecting the stroke. He realizes it's a violation and he puts the sand back into position. Which of the following is accurate? Is this guy in trouble? He is, yeah. Doug is penalized 2 strokes. You cannot avoid penalty by replacing the sand. Those items that we talked about specifically cannot be fixed. Once you do it, you're done. Stroke play, Taylor's ball is at rest in the general area and a branch interfering where she would play a stroke toward the green. She breaks that branch and immediately realizes she may have violated a rule. She then chips out sideways in a manner that the branch would not have interfered with that swing. What is the ruling? Is she penalized? Yes. Yeah. It's a 2-stroke penalty for improving the conditions affecting the stroke. Just because a different stroke was played after she broke the branch, the penalty cannot be avoided in that situation. I think there's also an interpretation on this one. But again, you guys don't need that because the rule covers it. Any questions on that one?
Does that affect the same as the lady that took her hand and pushed the branch, and said, oh, if she backed out of that and then walked into it, she'd be okay. But what if in doing that she broke the branch?
If she fairly breaks the branch, she's okay. If she goes in there in an intrusive way and says, oh, wait, that's not right, I can get in a different way, and she backs out and then very fairly gets in and the branch breaks, she's okay. She's okay. All right, which of the following is completely true with respect to stroke play? This first one, player may move sand in a penalty area and searching for a ball. Let me make sure I have my questions in front of me. So I did have a question that was kind of vague that Doug and I talked about. I want to make sure that it's on number 6, but I want to make sure we do that. Even I make a bogey every now and then. As long as I don't make it into a double or a triple, I kind of just make it a bogey. All right, so which is following is completely true. A player may move sand in a penalty area when searching for a ball. We know that's true. Okay, no problem there. So the other ones are not true. Why are they not true? They're accidental acts that would not result in a penalty under B. So improving the conditions that affect the stroke can happen as long as it's not done on purpose or deliberately. Okay, and in C, a ball playing in the teeing area must be played as it lies. We know it's not must. You can move it around, substitute it, all those crazy new teeing area rules. And replacing a divot is a violation of the rule in that relief area. So everybody clear on those? All right, 6. Okay, here's the first one I want to clear out. After taking a stance, a player moves a branch with his hand to see his ball. That in itself isn't a penalty, okay, unless he makes the stroke with that branch in that position. If he restores that branch, no penalty. Okay, so I didn't make this question as clear as I should have. So my thought process was he makes the stroke after moving it out of the way. That would be a penalty. But if you were thinking that if he moved it back, there's no penalty, you're correct. Okay, so please understand that. I just gave you both possible answers, and you're arguing with me? Right, right. So you can't make the stroke in that position, but you can fix the branch. You can put it back into position, but you're not entitled to see your ball, is what this question was intended to say. Is a player is not entitled to see their golf ball in making a stroke. So you can't just move stuff out of the way so you can see it. But you can move it back and not be penalized and put it back in your way. So that's what that question's about. What's that? You're entitled to see a part of the ball when you're recreating a lie, but not necessarily from the result of a stroke. If your ball plugs into a bunker and is completely buried, you have to play it as it lies or take an unplayable. You don't get to say, okay, well, I know it's here, I'm going to move it so I can hit it. Okay, but if you're identifying your golf ball, you're allowed to move it, but then you have to recreate the lie with a little bit showing. So you're not necessarily entitled to unless you're proceeding under a rule. So, all right, a player moves an attached branch out of the way after the wind moved it into a position that now interferes with the player's swing. Can we move that back? No, the natural forces have moved that branch. It is going to stay where the natural forces put it. So we do not allow the restoration in that situation. A player accidentally steps on an opponent's line of play, worsening the conditions that affect the stroke. We're going to penalize that player? No penalty. No, if the act is deliberate, we get a penalty. Okay? In both situations, deliberate and accidental, we can repair that mark. We can fix it before we make our stroke. A player enters a bunker and rakes those footprints on his line of play before the stroke. We're going to penalize that player. We're going to penalize that player. And a player takes a stance and digs in the sand in the bunker. He wants to change clubs and leaves the bunker and returns and digs in the sand some more in that same spot. Is that a penalty or no? No penalty. That's the rule that specifically allows the player to dig his stance in there. And the fact that he did it once isn't going to change it. So.
But it's a judgment in terms of what reason.
Well, if you think it's excessive, then it's a penalty. Right, but just if he fairly puts his stance in there, leaves, and then fairly gets his stance, he's okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a fact-based question. You know, if you think it's unreasonable, then yeah, he's obviously penalized. But if not, he's not penalized. Again, these questions aren't, going to hold you to any test score that you need to get, absolutely right. If you think a certain fact is different than what I think the fact is, your ruling might be right. Okay, the fact-based things is what gives us the answer on these questions. All right. All right, so we have no class for 3 weeks. We're going to take the holidays off, so in 3 weeks we'll come back. We'll talk about Rule 9.